Hello, and welcome. Tonight, we're going to spend the next few hours tracing one continuous idea across nearly 3,000 years of human history. The idea that intelligence, the ability to reason, to learn, to respond to the world, might not need to be born inside a living body at all. That it might, instead, be built. We call the modern version of this idea artificial intelligence, but that specific term is barely 70 years old. It was coined in 1956 at a small academic workshop at Dartmouth College in New Hampshire by a young mathematician named John McCarthy. We'll spend real time with that moment later tonight because it's one of the true turning points in this story. But the term is new. The dream behind it is not. Tonight's journey moves through several distinct eras, and it helps to know the shape of the path before we start walking it. We'll begin in the ancient world with myths of artificial beings built from bronze and clay, in cultures from Greece to the Middle East to China. These aren't just charming stories, they're early evidence that the question, can something built think or act with purpose, is almost as old as civilization itself. From there, we'll move into mathematics. Because before any machine could reason, humans first had to invent the tools of reasoning itself, formal logic, algebra, and eventually, in the 19th century, the strange and specific idea, first sketched by Ada Lovelace while working with Charles Babbage's analytical engine, that a machine might manipulate not just numbers but symbols and ideas. Then we arrive at the 20th century, and the actual construction of computing machines, vacuum tubes, punch cards, and the code-breaking efforts of the Second World War, which quietly produced some of the first true general-purpose computers, including Britain's Colossus and America's ENIAC. At the center of this era stands one of the most important and most tragic figures in this entire history, Alan Turing, a British mathematician who, in 1936, described a theoretical machine capable of computing anything that is, in principle, computable, and who later proposed a now-famous test for judging whether a machine's conversation could be mistaken for humans. We'll spend a full chapter on his life tonight, because his story is inseparable from the birth of this entire field. After that, we'll reach 1956, and the Dartmouth workshop itself, where the field of artificial intelligence was formally named and founded by McCarthy, along with Marvin Minsky, Claude Shannon, and Herbert Simon. We'll follow the field through its first wave of genuine optimism, when researchers believed human-level machine intelligence might arrive within a generation. Then, we'll follow it through two long periods of disappointment and reduced funding, known to historians as the AI winters, when overpromised results, limited computing power, and a lack of data brought progress to a near standstill. We'll then trace the quieter, less dramatic revolution that eventually pulled the field back from that stall: machine learning, the shift from explicitly programming rules into a computer toward letting a computer discover patterns in data on its own, statistics, decision trees, and eventually artificial neural networks, loosely inspired by the structure of neurons in the human brain. We'll explain, gently and without heavy mathematics, how these networks learn, through a process called training, and a key algorithm called backpropagation, which lets a network gradually adjust itself based on its mistakes. From there, we'll reach the deep learning era of the 2010s, when increased computing power, particularly graphics processing units originally designed for video games, combined with vastly larger datasets, like the ImageNet collection of over 1 million labeled images, to produce dramatic leaps in image recognition, speech recognition, and game-playing systems like DeepMind's AlphaGo. And finally, we'll arrive at the transformer architecture, introduced in 2017, which underlies the large language models many of us now use daily, including systems like ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini. We'll explain, through gentle analogy rather than equations, ideas like attention, tokens, and embeddings. We'll close by looking at where the field stands today, across medicine, science, art, and daily life. And then, without prediction or drama, we'll spend some quiet time simply wondering together about where it might go next. That's the shape of tonight's journey. You don't need to remember any of it. If you drift off partway through, the story will still be here waiting whenever you return to it. For now, just let your body settle. Let your breathing slow. And when you're ready, we'll step back, all the way back, to a time before computers, before mathematics, before science itself, to a moment when this whole extraordinary story began as nothing more than a myth. Before computers, humanity dreams of artificial minds. 3,000 years before the first computer was ever built, human beings had already begun to imagine one, not as a machine of circuits and silicon, but as a figure of bronze, of clay, of carved wood and wound spring. Across separate continents, in cultures that had no contact with one another, the same idea kept resurfacing, again and again, in myth, in scripture, and eventually, in engineering, that intelligence and the appearance of a living mind might not require a living body at all. This is the story of that idea, long before it had a name. The Bronze Guardian of Crete. On the island of Crete, in the mythology of ancient Greece, the story is told of a giant named Talos. Forged from bronze by Hephaestus, the god of fire and craftsmanship, Talos was set to guard the island's shores. 3 times each day, the myths say, he circled the coastline on foot, watching the horizon for approaching ships, and hurling boulders at any vessel that came too close. What separates Talos from an ordinary myth is a single, oddly technical detail. Instead of blood, a mysterious fluid called ichor moved through his bronze frame, sealed inside by a single pin near his ankle. In the legend of Jason and the Argonauts, the sorceress Medea defeats him not with weapons, but by removing that pin, draining the fluid, and bringing him to a stop, much like severing a power source. It is, in effect, an ancient culture's attempt to imagine the internal mechanics of an artificial being, roughly 28 centuries before anyone would actually build one. Talos was not an isolated figure in Greek thought. Hephaestus himself was said to have built golden handmaidens to assist him at his forge, described as being able to move and speak on their own. And the philosopher Aristotle, writing on the nature of labor, once mused that if tools could carry out tasks on command, craftsmen would no longer require assistance. A striking early link between mechanical labor and human freedom, made more than 2,000 years before the industrial age would make the question urgent. The clay protector of Prague. Half a world away, in Jewish folklore, a different figure emerges, the golem. Shaped from river clay or mud, a golem is brought to life not through breath, but through language, through sacred Hebrew letters, often the word emet, meaning truth, inscribed on its forehead or placed beneath its tongue. The most enduring version of the legend is tied to Rabbi Judah Loew of 16th century Prague, said to have built a golem to protect his community during a period of persecution. To end its animation, tradition holds, one needed only to remove the first letter of emet, transforming the word into met, the Hebrew word for death. What makes this story significant is not the clay, but the mechanism of its life. Correct instruction, correctly arranged, was enough to animate it. Centuries later, a very similar principle would sit at the heart of every computer program ever written. The mechanical performer of ancient China. In China, a text known as the Lizi, compiled around the 4th century, preserves an account of an engineer named Yan Shi, who presented a mechanical performer to King Mu of the Zhou dynasty. The figure could walk, sing, and move its lips in time to music. The king, delighted, watched it perform until it began winking toward the royal court's attendants, at which point the enraged king ordered it destroyed. Only then did Yan Shi reveal that the performer had never been alive at all, its body built from leather, wood, and glue, with internal components described as organs, each said to govern a different function. Historians largely regard the account as parable rather than engineering record. But it demonstrates that, over 1500 years ago, an audience could already be persuaded, however briefly, that a machine was a living performer. Chinese engineering in the centuries that followed produced increasingly precise mechanical clocks, water-powered devices, and automated figures built for imperial courts, running in parallel with, and at times ahead of, comparable developments taking shape in Europe. Al-Jazari and the Age of Programmable Machines. In the year 1206, in what is now southeastern Turkey, an engineer named Ismail al-Jazari completed a manuscript titled The Book of Knowledge of Ingenious Mechanical Devices. Al-Jazari was not working in the realm of myth. His book documented, with precise diagrams and instructions, more than 100 real mechanical inventions built during the Islamic Golden Age. Among them was a boat carrying 4 mechanical musicians, powered by water, designed to perform in a fixed, repeatable sequence, one of the earliest known programmable machines in recorded history. He also built elaborate water clocks with moving figures marking the hours, and an automated hand-washing device that dispensed water through a humanoid figure at the press of a lever. Here, for the first time in our story, the dream of artificial life meets rigorous, reproducible engineering. Al-Jazari's designs could be, and were, rebuilt by others, using nothing but his written instructions. Da Vinci's Mechanical Knight. Around the year 1495, working in the court of Milan, Leonardo da Vinci sketched the designs for a mechanical knight. Drawing on his extensive anatomical studies, da Vinci designed an internal system of cables, pulleys, and gears, housed within a suit of Germanic-Italian armor. According to his notes, the mechanism allowed the figure to sit upright, move its arms, rotate its head, and open and close its jaw. In the 1990s, robotics engineer Mark Rosheim built a working reconstruction based on da Vinci's surviving sketches, and confirmed that the design was, in fact, mechanically sound. Da Vinci was not building a court novelty. He was applying the same rigor he brought to his human anatomical drawings, testing how much of the body's movement could be reproduced through mechanism alone. The Age of Clockwork. By the 1700s and 1800s, Europe had entered a golden age of clockwork automata. In 1739, the French inventor Jacques de Vaucanson unveiled his most famous creation, a mechanical duck capable of flapping its wings, appearing to eat grain, and appearing to digest it moments later. Each wing alone contained more than 400 moving parts. The digestion, in truth, was an elaborate illusion, but the craftsmanship behind it was entirely real. Around the same period, the Swiss clockmakers Pierre and Henri-Louis Jacquet-Droz built a trio of automata that still function today, preserved in a museum in Switzerland. The writer, a small mechanical boy, can be configured through an internal set of cams to write custom short phrases in ink. The draftsman can produce several different drawings, and a third figure plays a small organ, its fingers pressing the actual keys. These were not children's toys. They were extraordinarily expensive demonstrations of precision engineering, built, in part, to explore just how much of human behavior could be reduced to mechanism. Audiences of the era often reported a distinct unease while watching these figures perform, a feeling the psychologist Ernst Jentsch would later name formally and which Sigmund Freud would bring into wider use in the early 20th century, under the term the uncanny, the particular discomfort of something almost, but not quite, alive. The philosophers behind the machines. Underneath these inventions, a deeper argument was unfolding, carried forward by some of the era's most influential thinkers. In the 17th century, René Descartes proposed that animal bodies, and much of human physiology, could be understood as intricate machinery, though he held that human reason and language reflected something beyond pure mechanism. Thomas Hobbes went further still. In his 1651 work Leviathan, Hobbes argued that reasoning itself might be nothing more than a form of calculation, describing thought, in his own words, as a process of addition and subtraction. That single claim, that thought might be a form of computation, stands as one of the most consequential ideas in this entire history. It is the exact premise that, centuries later, would allow mathematicians and engineers to ask, seriously and rigorously, whether a machine could reason at all. A bronze guardian, disabled by the removal of a single pin, a clay protector, animated by sacred letters, a leather performer, mistaken for something living, a programmable water-powered orchestra, a mechanical knight, sketched by Da Vinci, a duck that appeared to digest its food, a small boy, configured to write. Different centuries, different continents, different materials, and yet the same question, surfacing again and again. What is a mind, and could it ever be built? None of these cultures possessed electricity, or computers, or a formal science of computation. What they possessed was patient observation, exceptional mechanical skill, and imagination reaching towards something not yet possible. That reaching is where this story truly begins. Next, it finds a new language. Not myth and not mechanism alone, but mathematics. Mathematics creates the language of intelligence. Before a machine could ever be said to reason, human beings first had to invent the tools of reasoning itself. Not gears, not bronze, not clay, but something far less tangible, a formal language for logic, for certainty, and eventually, for thought translated into symbols. This chapter follows that invention, across more than 2,000 years, from the geometry of ancient Greece to a single sketch, written by a young mathematician in the 19th century, that first imagined a machine capable of manipulating ideas, not just numbers. Euclid and the architecture of Around 300 BCE, in the city of Alexandria, a mathematician named Euclid compiled a work known as the Elements. It was not simply a collection of geometric facts. It was something more foundational, a demonstration that complex truths could be built, step by step, from a small set of self-evident starting points, called axioms, using nothing but strict logical rules. Begin with a handful of accepted truths, apply valid reasoning, and arrive, with certainty, at new truths that follow necessarily from them. This structure, sometimes called axiomatic reasoning, would go on to shape mathematics for the next 2,000 years. And it introduced something the story of artificial intelligence would eventually depend upon entirely. The idea that reasoning itself could follow a fixed, repeatable procedure, independent of the particular subject being reasoned about. Algebra and the language of the unknown. WN. Centuries later, in the 9th century, in the city of Baghdad, a Persian mathematician named Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi wrote a treatise on solving equations, titled The Compendious Book on Calculation by Completion and Balancing. Its title, in Arabic, contained the word al-jabr, meaning restoration or completion, a word that would eventually become, in Latin translation, algebra. Al-Khwarizmi's true innovation was a method, a fixed, step-by-step procedure for solving an entire category of problems, regardless of the specific numbers involved. That same word, transliterated slightly differently through medieval Latin translations of his name, gives us another term central to this story: algorithm. Mathematics, through al-Khwarizmi, had gained the ability to describe not just quantities, but procedures, instructions that could be followed exactly, and would always produce the correct result. Formal logic before the comp. Uter. For nearly 2,000 years after Aristotle first codified formal logic in ancient Greece, reasoning remained something described in ordinary language, structured through patterns called syllogisms. That began to change in the 17th century, with the German philosopher and mathematician Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. Leibniz proposed something remarkably ambitious for his time: a universal formal language, which he called the Characteristica Universalis, capable of representing any concept as a precise combination of symbols. Paired with it, he imagined a calculus ratiocinator, a method by which disputes between people could be settled not through argument, but through calculation. Leibniz famously suggested that two philosophers in disagreement might one day simply say to each other, "Let us calculate," and resolve the matter through formal symbolic reasoning. Leibniz never completed this system. The mathematics of his era wasn't yet capable of supporting it. But the vision itself, that thought could be reduced to symbol manipulation, governed by fixed rules, would wait patiently for nearly 2 centuries, until the right mathematics finally caught up with it. George Boole and the algebra of logic. That mathematics arrived in 1854, when the English mathematician George Boole published a work titled An Investigation of the Laws of Thought. Boole's achievement was to translate logical reasoning into algebra. In his system, statements could only take one of 2 values, true or false, and could be combined using precise operations. And, or, and not, functioning much like addition and multiplication function in ordinary arithmetic. For the first time, human reasoning, at least in its formal structure, could be manipulated using mathematical notation, checked for consistency, and calculated with the same rigor as an equation. Boole could not have known this at the time, but his algebra of logic would, roughly 80 years later, become the exact mathematical foundation underlying the electronic circuits inside every digital computer ever built. Every circuit that opens or closes, every bit that holds a 1 or a 0, ultimately traces its logical structure back to Boole's true or false algebra. Charles Babbage and the analytical engine. At roughly the same moment in history, in England, a mathematician and inventor named Charles Babbage was pursuing a very different, but closely related, ambition. In the 1830s, Babbage designed a machine he called the analytical engine. Unlike his earlier difference engine, which was built to compute a single class of mathematical tables, the analytical engine was designed to be general purpose. It could, in principle, perform any calculation, guided by a sequence of instructions fed into it on punched cards, a method borrowed directly from the automated textile looms of the period. The design included a mill, which functioned much like what we would now call a processor, and a store, functioning as memory. The machine, had it been completed, would have been capable of conditional branching, repeating instructions, and altering its own behavior based on the results of earlier calculations. Babbage never finished building it. The precision engineering it required outpaced what 19th century manufacturing could reliably produce. But on paper, the analytical engine was, in every meaningful sense, the first design for a general-purpose computer, roughly a full century before one would actually be built. Ada Lovelace and the First Prager. Working alongside Babbage was Ada Lovelace, a mathematician and the daughter of the poet Lord Byron. In 1843, Lovelace translated an Italian paper describing Babbage's analytical engine, and in the process, added her own extensive notes, roughly 3 times the length of the original text. Within those notes, Lovelace included a detailed method for using the analytical engine to calculate a sequence of numbers known as Bernoulli numbers, a sequence of precise instructions, capable of being executed by the machine, step by step. Historians widely regard this as the first published computer program in history, written for a machine that would not actually exist, in working form, for another 100 years. But Lovelace's deeper contribution went further than the algorithm itself. She wrote, with striking clarity, that the analytical engine might act upon other things besides number. That if the relationships between objects, whether sounds or symbols or ideas, could be expressed through the same abstract logic as numbers, the machine might manipulate those relationships as well. In that single observation, Lovelace anticipated something no one else at the time had articulated, that a machine of this kind might not be limited to arithmetic at all, that it might, one day, process language, music, or symbols of any kind, an idea that would not be fully realized until the era of general-purpose digital computing, more than a century later. Symbolic reasoning as a foundation. By the close of the 19th century, several separate threads had converged, without any single person fully realizing where they would eventually lead. Euclid had shown that truth could be built through fixed procedure. Al-Khwarizmi had shown that procedure itself could be written down and repeated exactly. Leibniz had imagined reasoning reduced entirely to symbols. Boole had built the actual algebra to make that reduction real. Babbage had designed a machine capable of executing procedure automatically, and Lovelace had seen, before almost anyone else, that such a machine might reason about far more than numbers alone. None of these figures used the words artificial intelligence. The term itself was still more than a century away. But together, without quite intending to, they had built something essential, a language precise enough that thought itself might, one day, be expressed as calculatio. N. A geometer in Alexandria, building certainty from simple axioms, a mathematician in Baghdad, turning solutions into repeatable procedure, a philosopher in Germany, dreaming of a universal symbolic language, an Englishman, reducing logic to algebra, an inventor, designing a machine that could follow instructions, and a young mathematician, seeing further than the invention itself, toward everything a machine like it might one day become. Mathematics had given this ancient dream something it never had before, a precise, testable language. What it still lacked was a body, a physical machine capable of actually carrying out that language, at speed, without a human hand turning each gear. That machine was still a century away, but the century that would build it had already begun. The birth of computing. By the early 20th century, mathematics had given the world a precise language for reasoning. What it still lacked was a body, a physical machine capable of carrying out that language automatically, at speed, without a human hand turning each gear. That body would be built, piece by piece, across roughly 100 years, through the invention of long-distance signaling, the vacuum tube, and finally, under the extraordinary pressure of a world war. In 1837, the American inventor Samuel Morse, along with his collaborators, developed a practical electrical telegraph, allowing messages to be sent across great distances as a sequence of electrical pulses. Morse, together with Alfred Vail, devised a code of short and long pulses, dots and dashes, capable of representing every letter of the alphabet. By 1844, the first long-distance telegraph line connected Washington and Baltimore, and Morse transmitted the now famous message, "What hath God wrought?" The telegraph's true significance to this story isn't the message itself, but the method. Information of any kind could now be broken down into a simple sequence of binary-like signals, present or absent, and reconstructed accurately at the other end. It was an early, practical demonstration of an idea that would later sit at the very heart of digital computing. For electrical signals to do more than simply travel, they needed to be controlled, amplified, and switched at speeds far beyond what mechanical gears could ever achieve. In 1904, the British physicist John Ambrose Fleming developed the first vacuum tube, a device capable of controlling the flow of electric current. 2 years later, in 1906, the American inventor Lee De Forest improved on the design with a triode, a vacuum tube capable of amplifying an electrical signal, and, crucially, of acting as an extremely fast electronic switch. An electronic switch could be either on or off. Exactly the two states that George Boole's algebra of logic, developed half a century earlier, had already described mathematically. For the first time, Boole's true or false logic had a physical, electrical form it could actually inhabit, and it could operate thousands of times faster than any mechanical gear ever could. In 1941, in Berlin, a German engineer named Konrad Zuse completed a machine called the Z3. Working largely alone, and with limited resources, Zuse built the Z3 using electromechanical relays rather than vacuum tubes, but its design included two features that mark it as a genuine milestone. It operated using binary numbers, rather than the decimal system most earlier calculating machines relied on, and it was fully programmable, its instructions supplied on punched celluloid film. Many historians now regard the Z3 as the first working, programmable, digital computer in history. Its wartime origins meant it remained largely unknown outside Germany for decades, and the original machine was destroyed in an Allied bombing raid in 1943. But its design anticipated core principles that would define computing for the rest of the century. Also in 1941, in England, a very different kind of urgency was driving computing forward. At Bletchley Park, a secluded estate northwest of London, a team of mathematicians, engineers, and codebreakers had been assembled to break Germany's encrypted military communications. Their target eventually included not only the well-known Enigma cipher, but an even more complex cipher used for high-level German army communications, generated by a machine the British code-named Tunny. To break Tunny's cipher at the speed the war demanded, the engineer Tommy Flowers proposed building an entirely electronic machine using vacuum tubes rather than mechanical relays. The result, completed in 1943 and expanded through 1944, was Colossus, widely recognized today as the world's first programmable, electronic, digital computer. Colossus contained roughly 1,600 vacuum tubes in its original form, and could process 5,000 characters of encrypted text per second, dramatically shortening the time needed to break German communications. Its existence remained classified for decades after the war, which meant that for much of the 20th century, Colossus's true place in computing history went almost entirely unrecognized. In the United States, similar pressures were producing parallel breakthroughs. In 1944, at Harvard University, the physicist Howard Aiken, working with engineers at IBM, completed the Harvard Mark I, an enormous electromechanical computer, over 50 feet long, used by the U.S. Navy for complex ballistics and engineering calculations. Then, in 1945, at the University of Pennsylvania, engineers John Presper Eckert and John Mauchly completed ENIAC, the Electronic Numerical Integrator and Computer. Unlike the Mark I, ENIAC was fully electronic, built from more than 17,000 vacuum tubes, and it was extraordinarily fast for its time. capable of performing about 5,000 additions per second. ENIAC was originally designed to calculate artillery firing tables for the U.S. Army, but its completion, just after the war's end, meant it was quickly put to broader use, including early calculations for the hydrogen bomb project. Programming ENIAC, however, was a formidable physical task in itself. It required manually rewiring plug boards and setting switches, sometimes taking days to configure for a new calculation. A team of women mathematicians, including Kathleen McNulty, Jean Bartik, Frances Spence, and several others, carried out much of this programming work, and are now recognized as among the first true computer programmers in history. As these early machines proliferated, a crucial theoretical question remained only partly solved. How should a computer store both its data and its instructions? In 1945, the mathematician John von Neumann, drawing on discussions with the ENIAC team, outlined an architecture in which a computer's instructions could be stored in the same memory as its data, rather than set physically through wiring or switches each time. This meant a computer's behavior could be changed simply by loading a different set of instructions into memory, rather than by rebuilding its physical connections. This approach, now known as the von Neumann architecture, remains, in its essential structure, the foundation of nearly every computer built since, including the device most people are likely resting near tonight. Early memory technologies to support this idea were often strange, by modern standards. Mercury delay lines, which stored data as pulses of sound traveling through tubes of liquid mercury, and the Williams tube, which stored data as patterns of electrical charge on the surface of a cathode ray tube. Crude by later measures, but each one, in its own way, solved the same essential problem: how to give a machine something resembling memory. 7. From calculation to the first question. By the close of the 1940s, in less than a single decade, computing had advanced from Zeus's relay-based Z3, to Colossus's classified codebreaking, to ENIAC's room-sized banks of vacuum tubes, to von Neumann's elegant architecture for stored programs. These machines were extraordinarily fast at one thing: calculation. They could add, subtract, and process encrypted signals at speeds no human being could approach. But a deeper question, largely unasked until now, was beginning to surface among the very mathematicians and engineers who had built these machines. Calculation was one thing, but could a machine ever do something that looked more like thinking? A telegraph line, carrying messages as pulses of current, a vacuum tube, switching current thousands of times each second, a relay-based machine in wartime Berlin, a classified code-breaking computer in the English countryside, a room-sized calculator at an American university, programmed by hand, and a stored program architecture, still running, in essence, inside nearly every computer built since. In under a decade, the world had gone from mechanical calculation to genuine electronic computing, and one of the very people who had helped make that leap possible had, years earlier, already begun asking a far larger question. Not simply what a machine could calculate, but what it might mean, in principle, for a machine to think at all. His name was Alan Turing, and his story is where we turn next. Every long history has a figure who seems to stand at its exact center. Not because they worked alone, but because so many separate threads, mathematics, engineering, philosophy, and eventually tragedy, passed directly through their life. In this story, that figure is Alan Turing. Alan Matheson Turing was born in London on the 23rd of June, 1912, the son of a British civil servant stationed in colonial India. Because of his father's posting, Turing spent much of his early childhood separated from his parents, raised largely by foster families and, later, sent to boarding school in England, a common arrangement for children of British colonial administrators at the time. Even as a young boy, Turing showed an unusual, independent curiosity. Teachers at his early school sometimes found him difficult to categorize, his handwriting untidy, his interests narrow but intense, focused far more on mathematics and scientific puzzles than on the classical education his schools were built around. At Sherborne School, Turing formed a close friendship with a fellow student named Christopher Morcom, who shared his fascination with science and mathematics. Their friendship was, by several accounts, the most formative relationship of Turing's adolescence, and it ended abruptly when Morcom died suddenly in 1930 from complications of bovine tuberculosis. Turing was deeply affected by his friend's death, and it appears to have shaped some of his earliest philosophical questions about mind, about consciousness, and about whether thought could somehow persist or be understood beyond the physical brain that produced it. In 1931, Turing entered King's College, Cambridge, to study mathematics. He graduated with distinction, and in 1935, at just 22 years old, he was elected a Fellow of King's College, based on a dissertation on probability theory. But it was in 1936 that Turing produced the work that would define the rest of this entire story, a paper titled On Computable Numbers, with an application to the Entscheidungsproblem. The Entscheidungsproblem, German for decision problem, was a major open question in mathematical logic, asking whether there existed a general method capable of determining, for any given mathematical statement, whether it was true or false. To answer it, Turing needed a precise, formal definition of what it even meant to compute something. His solution was a thought experiment, now known as the Turing machine, an imagined device consisting of an infinitely long tape, divided into cells, along with a simple mechanism capable of reading a symbol, writing a symbol, and moving one cell left or right, based on a fixed set of rules. It sounds almost absurdly simple, and that simplicity was exactly the point. Turing proved that this minimal device, given the right set of rules, could compute anything that was, in principle, computable at all. Every algorithm, every calculation, every computer built since, can be shown to be mathematically equivalent to some version of Turing's simple tape and symbol machine. In the same paper, Turing also demonstrated that a single design, a universal machine, could simulate any other Turing machine, simply by being given the right instructions. In effect, he had described, on paper, the core logical principle behind every general-purpose computer that would ever be built, more than a decade before the first one actually existed. Shortly after, Turing traveled to Princeton University, where he completed a PhD in 1938 under the logician Alonzo Church, whose own independent work had arrived at closely related conclusions. Their combined findings are now known, together, as the Church-Turing thesis. When the Second World War began in 1939, Turing was recruited to Bletchley Park, joining the British government's code-breaking efforts against Germany's military communications. Germany's primary encryption device, Enigma, scrambled messages using a series of rotating wheels, producing a cipher its operators believed to be effectively unbreakable. Polish cryptographers, notably Marian Rejewski, had already made crucial early progress against Enigma before the war, and their work was shared with British intelligence shortly after the German invasion of Poland. Building on that foundation, Turing led the design of an electromechanical device called the bomb, capable of rapidly testing thousands of possible rotor settings, dramatically narrowing down the vast number of combinations Enigma could produce. Turing focused particularly on the naval variant of Enigma, considered especially difficult, and his work in Hut 8, the section of Bletchley Park devoted to naval code-breaking, became central to Britain's ability to track and counter German submarine activity in the Atlantic. Historians and mathematicians who have studied the war's timeline have suggested that the intelligence gained through this code-breaking work shortened the war by a significant margin, quite possibly by 2 years or more, saving an enormous number of lives on both sides. For decades after the war, this work remained classified. The British government did not publicly acknowledge Bletchley Park's role, or Turing's contribution to it, until the 1970s, meaning Turing died without the wider world ever knowing what he had done during the war. Once the war ended, Turing turned his attention back to the theoretical machine he had described a decade earlier, now asking how such a device might actually be built. In 1945, he joined the National Physical Laboratory in London, where he produced a detailed design for a computer he called the Automatic Computing Engine, or ACE. His design was, for its time, remarkably ambitious, calling for a fast, stored program electronic computer well beyond what most of his contemporaries considered practical to build. Progress on ACE was slow, hampered by limited resources and a lack of institutional support, and Turing, growing frustrated, left the project in 1948, moving to the University of Manchester, where a scaled-down version of his design contributed to what became the Manchester Mark I, one of the earliest working stored program computers in the world. At Manchester, Turing's interests broadened further still, moving into a field far removed from cryptography or logic, mathematical biology, and specifically, the question of how biological patterns, like the spots on a leopard or the arrangement of leaves on a plant, might emerge from simple chemical processes, a subject now known as morphogenesis, on which Turing published influential work in 1952. In 1950, Turing published a paper that would become, alongside his 1936 work, one of the two pillars of his enduring legacy: Computing Machinery and Intelligence. In the philosophy journal Mind, the paper opens with a direct question: can machines think? But Turing quickly set that question aside as too vague to answer meaningfully, and proposed something more precise, which he called the imitation game. In its now famous form, a human evaluator holds a text-based conversation with two unseen participants, one human and one machine. If the evaluator cannot reliably tell which is which, based on the conversation alone, the machine is said to have passed the test. Turing wasn't claiming this proved a machine could truly think, in whatever deeper sense that word might carry. His argument was more careful, and in some ways more radical, that the question of thinking itself might be poorly defined, and that a machine capable of convincingly imitating intelligent conversation was, for most practical purposes, doing something meaningfully similar to what we call thought. This test, later named the Turing test in his honor, would go on to shape the field of artificial intelligence for the next 70 years, and remains a reference point, still debated, still argued over, in discussions of machine intelligence today. In January of 1952, Turing's home in Manchester was burgled. During the police investigation that followed, Turing disclosed a relationship he had with another man, and as a direct result, he was charged with gross indecency under a British law that criminalized homosexual acts between men. Turing was convicted later that year. To avoid a prison sentence, he accepted a course of hormonal treatment involving synthetic estrogen, intended at the time to suppress libido, a treatment now widely understood as a form of chemical castration. The conviction also cost him his security clearance, ending his ability to continue consulting work related to his wartime code-breaking, and subjecting him to close government surveillance, given the sensitivity of what he had once known. On the 8th of June, 1954, Turing was found dead at his home, at the age of 41. A post-mortem determined the cause of death to be cyanide poisoning, and an inquest at the time ruled the death a suicide, noting a partially eaten apple found beside his bed, though the apple itself was never tested for cyanide, and some historians and biographers have since questioned that ruling, suggesting the possibility of accidental poisoning from laboratory chemicals Turing kept at home for his research. Whatever the precise circumstances, what is not in dispute is this: a man who had contributed as much as almost anyone alive to defeating one of history's greatest threats, and who had, separately, laid the theoretical foundation for the entire field of computing, was hounded, prosecuted, and chemically treated by the very government he had served, for the simple fact of who he loved. For decades, Turing's story remained largely unknown to the public, obscured first by wartime secrecy, and then by the lingering shame the British government had attached to his conviction. That began to change in the early 21st century. In 2009, following a public petition, British Prime Minister Gordon Brown issued a formal government apology for the treatment Turing had received. In 2013, Queen Elizabeth II granted Turing a posthumous royal pardon, an exceptionally rare act. And in 2017, the British Parliament passed a law, informally known as Alan Turing's Law, retroactively pardoning thousands of other men who had been convicted under the same discriminatory statute. Today, Turing's contributions are memorialized widely. His portrait appears on the British £50 note, issued in 2021. The Association for Computing Machinery's highest honor, the Turing Award, established in 1966, is often described as computing's equivalent of the Nobel Prize. And the Turing test, imperfect as it may be, remains a touchstone concept, still referenced every time a modern language model's conversational ability is discussed. A boy who lost his closest friend and began quietly asking what thought truly was. A young mathematician who imagined a simple machine, and in doing so, defined the theoretical limits of computation itself. A codebreaker whose secret work helped end a war that killed tens of millions. An engineer who helped design some of the earliest real computers. A philosopher who asked, carefully and precisely, what it might mean for a machine to think. And a man ultimately destroyed not by any failure of his own extraordinary mind, but by the prejudice of the era he lived in. Alan Turing did not live to see almost any of what his ideas would eventually build. He never saw a computer pass his own imitation game. He never saw his face on a banknote. He never received his government's apology. But nearly every idea in the rest of tonight's story, in some way, passes back through him. And it was, fittingly, a small group of researchers, gathering just 2 years after his death, who would take his questions and give this entire field, for the very first time, a name. The Birth of Artificial Intelligence, 1956. By the middle of the 1950s, every thread of this story, ancient myth, formal logic, electronic computing, and Alan Turing's careful philosophical questions had converged, quietly, on a single moment. That moment took place not in a grand laboratory, but on a small college campus in rural New Hampshire, over the course of a single summer, in 1956. It was here that this field finally received its name. The gathering had its origins in the summer of 1955, when a young mathematician named John McCarthy, then a professor at Dartmouth College, drafted a funding proposal alongside 3 collaborators. Marvin Minsky, a researcher at Harvard, Nathaniel Rochester, an engineer at IBM who had helped design some of the company's earliest computers, and Claude Shannon, already renowned for founding the field of information theory at Bell Labs. Together, the 4 submitted their proposal to the Rockefeller Foundation, requesting funding for what they called the Dartmouth Summer Research Project on Artificial Intelligence. It was, as far as historians have been able to determine, the very first time that exact phrase, artificial intelligence, had ever appeared in print. The proposal's opening line stated its ambition plainly, that the study would proceed on the conjecture that every aspect of learning or any other feature of intelligence can in principle be so precisely described that a machine can be made to simulate it. It was an extraordinarily bold claim, made with almost no supporting evidence behind it. But it gave a scattered set of overlapping interests in logic, in neural networks, in language, and in problem solving, a single unifying banner for the very first time. McCarthy chose the term carefully and somewhat deliberately to distinguish this new effort from a closely related field already in existence: cybernetics, the study of control and communication systems, pioneered by the mathematician Norbert Wiener. McCarthy wanted a name that focused specifically on the goal of building machines capable of intelligent behavior, rather than on the broader study of feedback and control systems in general. Artificial intelligence, a phrase that had barely been used before, and had certainly never been used as the name of an academic field, captured that focus precisely. It's worth pausing on how strange this decision must have seemed at the time. The researchers gathering that summer were, in effect, naming a field that did not yet contain a single working example of what it claimed to study. They were naming an ambition, not an achievement. The workshop itself ran for roughly 6 to 8 weeks during the summer of 1956 on the Dartmouth College campus in Hanover, New Hampshire, funded by a Rockefeller Foundation grant of $7,700. Unlike a modern conference, attendance wasn't continuous. Researchers arrived and departed at different points throughout the summer, some staying for the entire duration, others visiting for only a week or two. Estimates suggest somewhere between 10 and 20 researchers participated at various points, a remarkably small number, considering the scale of the field that would eventually grow from this single gathering. Alongside McCarthy, Minsky, Rochester, and Shannon, the workshop drew several other researchers who would go on to shape the field for decades. Ray Solomonoff, who would later become a founding figure in the theory of algorithmic probability. Oliver Selfridge, whose later work on pattern recognition would influence early computer vision. Arthur Samuel, already working on a checkers playing program that would become one of the first well-known examples of a machine improving its own performance through experience. And arriving with an idea that would prove to be the most concrete achievement to emerge from the entire summer: Alan Newell and Herbert Simon. Newell and Simon, working with a programmer named Cliff Shaw at the Rand Corporation, arrived at Dartmouth with something none of the other attendees had yet managed to produce: an actual working program. Called the Logic Theorist, it was designed to prove mathematical theorems from Alfred North Whitehead and Bertrand Russell's landmark work Principia Mathematica, using search techniques and heuristic shortcuts to explore possible proofs, rather than checking every possibility exhaustively. Remarkably, the logic theorist succeeded in proving 38 of the first 52 theorems in the relevant chapter of Principia Mathematica, and in one specific case, it found a proof more elegant than the one Whitehead and Russell had originally published, a fact Newell and Simon reportedly attempted, unsuccessfully, to share with a mathematics journal at the time, since the paper would have listed a computer program as a co-author. Many historians now consider the logic theorist to be the first true artificial intelligence program ever written, and its debut, that summer at Dartmouth, gave the assembled researchers something rare and immediately validating: tangible proof that a machine could already do something that at least resembled abstract, symbolic reasoning. Despite the significance historians would later attach to it, the Dartmouth workshop was not, at the time, considered a dramatic success by many who attended. The researchers had arrived with very different backgrounds, and often very different ideas about what intelligence even was, or how best to study it. Some favored symbolic logic, others were drawn toward simulating the physical structure of the brain itself, an approach that would later resurface, decades on, as neural networks. Disagreements over direction were common, and no unified theory or roadmap emerged from the summer's discussions. What did emerge, and what would prove to be lasting, was simply the name and the sense of shared purpose it created. For the first time, researchers working on logic, on language, on learning, and on problem-solving could describe themselves as working on the same underlying question, under a single, if still largely aspirational, banner. It's worth pausing here to recognize just how much of the field's future ran directly through the small group gathered that summer. John McCarthy would go on, within just a few years, to invent the Lisp programming language, which would become the dominant language of artificial intelligence research for decades, and would also coin the term computer timesharing. Marvin Minsky would co-found the MIT Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, and become one of the field's most influential, and at times most controversial, theorists. Claude Shannon would continue shaping information theory's applications to computing and communication for years to come. And Newell and Simon would return to Carnegie Mellon University, where their continued collaboration would help establish it as one of the world's leading centers for artificial intelligence research. A single New Hampshire summer, attended by fewer than 20 people, had quietly seeded institutions, programming languages, and research agendas that would shape the next 70 years of computing history. Looking back, what's most striking about the Dartmouth workshop isn't any single technical achievement. It's the sheer confidence of its founding claim that intelligence itself, in all its forms, could eventually be described precisely enough for a machine to reproduce it. That confidence would prove, in the coming years, to be simultaneously the field's greatest asset and, at times, its greatest liability. A funding proposal, drafted the year before, carefully choosing a new name for an old dream, a small campus in New Hampshire, hosting a scattered summer gathering of fewer than 20 researchers, a working program, proving mathematical theorems, arriving as the summer's one undeniable achievement, and a handful of names, McCarthy, Minsky, Shannon, Newell, Simon, who would go on to build the very institutions where this field would grow for decades to come. Artificial intelligence, as both a name and a formal field of study, had finally been born, and the researchers who founded it left that summer with a shared, unshakable optimism, a belief, sincerely held, that the deepest mysteries of human thought might be solved not in decades, but within a single working career. That optimism is where our story turns next. The First Golden Age. In the years immediately following the Dartmouth workshop, a small community of researchers, scattered across just a handful of American universities, entered a period of extraordinary confidence. Working programs, however narrow, kept arriving, and each new success seemed, to the people building them, like further proof that genuine machine intelligence was not decades away, but merely years. This is the story of that first golden age, and of the optimism that defined it. In 1958, the psychologist and computer scientist Frank Rosenblatt, working at the Cornell Aeronautical Laboratory, introduced a new kind of machine called the perceptron. Loosely inspired by the structure of a biological neuron, the perceptron was designed to learn. Rather than being explicitly programmed with fixed rules, it adjusted a set of internal weighted connections based on examples it was shown, gradually improving its ability to classify simple patterns, such as distinguishing between different shapes. In 1960, Rosenblatt unveiled a physical version of the machine, the Mark I perceptron, built specifically for image recognition, using an array of 400 light-sensitive cells connected to its learning circuitry. The public reaction was extraordinary and, in hindsight, considerably overstated. The New York Times, covering the unveiling, reported that the Navy expected the device would eventually be able to walk, talk, see, write, reproduce itself, and even become conscious of its own existence. Rosenblatt himself made more measured claims in his technical papers, but the gap between the sober reality of a simple pattern classifying circuit and the extraordinary expectations placed upon it would prove to be an early warning sign of a pattern this field would repeat many times in the decades to come. Building on the success of their logic theorist, Alan Newell and Herbert Simon, together again with Cliff Shaw, introduced a more ambitious program in 1957 called the General Problem Solver, or GPS. Where the logic theorist had been built specifically to prove mathematical theorems, GPS aimed considerably higher. Its designers hoped to capture a general method of human problem-solving itself, applicable across many different kinds of puzzles, using a technique they called means-ends analysis, in which the program continually compared its current state to its desired goal, and selected actions designed to reduce the difference between the two. GPS could, in fact, solve a range of logic puzzles and simple formal problems, but its generality turned out to be far more limited than its name suggested, working well only within narrowly structured problems that could be cleanly defined in its particular formal language. Even so, at the time, GPS was seen as a genuinely significant step, a program that appeared to be reasoning about goals, rather than simply following fixed instructions. In 1966, at MIT, a computer scientist named Joseph Weizenbaum introduced a program that would become one of the most famous and most misunderstood achievements of this entire era. ELIZA. ELIZA was, at its technical core, remarkably simple. It worked by scanning a user's typed sentence for keywords and applying a set of pattern-matching rules to generate a plausible response, often by rephrasing part of the user's own statement back to them as a question. Its best-known configuration, called Doctor, was designed to imitate the conversational style of a Rogerian psychotherapist, a style that, conveniently for Weizenbaum's design, relies heavily on reflecting a patient's own words back to them. The results startled even Weizenbaum himself. Users, including his own secretary, reportedly asked to be left alone in the room to speak privately with the program, treating its scripted, mechanical reflections as genuine understanding and empathy. Weizenbaum had not set out to demonstrate machine intelligence at all. He had, in his own later writing, intended ELIZA partly as a demonstration of how easily people could be fooled by surface-level conversational tricks. The phenomenon he observed, people readily attributing real understanding and even emotional depth to a simple pattern-matching program, would later come to be known, across the entire field, as the ELIZA effect, and it remains a relevant caution, discussed by researchers, even in conversations about today's far more sophisticated language systems. A few years later, between 1968 and 1970, a graduate student named Terry Winograd, working at MIT, developed a program called SHRDLU that appeared, within its own carefully limited domain, to genuinely understand natural language. SHRDLU operated within a simulated environment known as the blocks world, a simple digital space containing colored blocks, pyramids, and boxes of various sizes. A user could type ordinary English instructions, such as asking the program to place a particular block on top of another, or to move a pyramid out of the way, and SHRDLU would carry out the request, while also being able to answer follow-up questions about its own actions, explain its reasoning, and correctly track pronouns like it across a conversation. Within its narrow, artificial world, SHRDLU's performance was genuinely impressive, and it was, for a time, held up as strong evidence that machine understanding of language was close at hand. What became clear only later was just how much of SHRDLU's apparent understanding depended on the extreme simplicity and complete predictability of its blocks world environment, techniques that worked beautifully within that small, closed system proved extraordinarily difficult to extend to the far messier complexity of real-world language. Fueled by achievements like these, leading researchers of the era made public predictions that, in retrospect, stand out as remarkably, almost startlingly confident. In 1965, Herbert Simon predicted that within 20 years, machines would be capable of performing any work a human being could do. In 1967, Marvin Minsky wrote that within a single generation, the problem of creating artificial intelligence would be substantially solved. And in a 1970 interview with Life magazine, Minsky went further still, suggesting that within a period of just 3 to 8 years, researchers would have built a machine with the general intelligence of an average human being. These weren't fringe opinions. They came from the field's most respected, most senior figures, working at its most well-funded institutions, and speaking, by every indication, in complete sincerity. This optimism was matched by genuine institutional growth. The Advanced Research Projects Agency, a division of the U.S. Department of Defense known as ARPA, provided substantial funding to artificial intelligence research throughout the 1960s, with comparatively few restrictions on how it needed to be spent, trusting the judgment of the field's leading researchers. Major research centers took shape during this period. The MIT Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, co-founded by Marvin Minsky and John McCarthy. The Stanford Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, founded in 1963. And Carnegie Mellon University's growing program, built around the continued work of Newell and Simon. A closely related field, machine translation, saw similar early enthusiasm. A public demonstration in 1954, known as the Georgetown IBM experiment, automatically translated a small set of sentences from Russian into English, and researchers at the time predicted that fully automatic, high-quality translation was only a few years away. That particular prediction, as we'll see shortly, would not age well at all. Looking back across this period, what's striking isn't that these researchers were foolish or careless. Many of them were among the most capable scientific minds of their generation. What's striking, instead, is how consistently a real, genuine technical success, within a small, carefully controlled problem, was extrapolated into sweeping predictions about general intelligence, arriving within a few short years. A theorem-proving program became a prediction about all human labor. A simple conversational script became a claim about genuine machine understanding. A closed, artificial world of blocks and pyramids became evidence that natural language itself was nearly solved. A learning machine unveiled to headlines predicting consciousness within a generation. A general problem solver, general in name more than in practice. A simple conversational program, mistaken by its own users for genuine empathy. A small blocks world, mistaken for a solved theory of language. And a chorus of the field's most respected voices, confidently predicting human-level machine intelligence within years, not decades. This was, without question, a genuine golden age. Real breakthroughs, real momentum, real institutional support, gathered in a remarkably short span of time. But confidence, however sincerely held, is not the same as certainty. And by the early 1970s, the gap between what had been promised and what had actually been delivered was about to become impossible to ignore. The AI winters. Every period of extraordinary confidence eventually meets the test of delivered results. For the first generation of artificial intelligence researchers, that reckoning arrived gradually, then all at once, across two separate periods now known, collectively, as the AI winters. Funding didn't merely slow during these years. In some cases, it disappeared almost entirely, and with it, entire research programs, entire academic careers, and, for a time, much of the public's willingness to take the field's promises seriously at all. The earliest and clearest sign of trouble came from machine translation, one of the field's most heavily funded early applications. Following the promising 1954 Georgetown IBM demonstration, the United States government invested heavily in automatic Russian-to-English translation throughout the Cold War, hoping for a fast, reliable way to process the vast quantities of Soviet scientific and military documents. By 1964, with results still falling far short of expectations, the U.S. government commissioned a review by the Automatic Language Processing Advisory Committee, generally known as ALPAC. Its 1966 report was blunt, and, for the field, devastating. It concluded that machine translation was slower, less accurate, and twice as expensive as human translation, and recommended an end to further funding for the effort. The ALPAC report effectively ended U.S. government funding for machine translation research for well over a decade, and it stands, in retrospect, as the opening tremor of the crisis to come. A second, deeper blow arrived in 1969, from within the field itself. Marvin Minsky, one of artificial intelligence's own founders, published a book together with Seymour Papert, titled simply Perceptrons. In it, the two mathematicians rigorously proved a fundamental limitation of Frank Rosenblatt's single-layer perceptron design, the same design that had generated such extraordinary headlines a decade earlier. Minsky and Papert demonstrated that a single-layer perceptron was mathematically incapable of solving certain classes of problems, including a deceptively simple logical function known as exclusive OR, or XOR, which requires distinguishing between combinations of inputs that cannot be separated by a single straight dividing line. The book was a careful, technically precise piece of mathematics, but its practical effect on the field was immense, and many researchers would later argue, considerably larger than its authors had actually intended. Funding for neural network research across the board collapsed in the years that followed, and the approach would remain largely dormant, revived only in small pockets of research for roughly the next 15 years. The most direct and formal blow came in 1973, from Britain. The UK Science Research Council commissioned the applied mathematician Sir James Lighthill to assess the state of artificial intelligence research and its future prospects. Lighthill's resulting report was sharply critical, arguing that the field had consistently failed to achieve its own grandiose stated objectives, and drawing a particular distinction between narrow, useful applications and the broader, more ambitious goal of general machine intelligence, which he considered to be making essentially no real progress. The report's impact was immediate and severe. Funding for artificial intelligence research was cut dramatically across most British universities, and research in the field was, for a time, entirely discontinued at all but a small handful of institutions, including the University of Edinburgh, the University of Essex, and the University of Sussex. A televised debate held shortly afterward, pitting Lighthill against several leading AI researchers, only reinforced the public sense that the field's promises had badly outpaced its actual results. Similar pressures were building in the United States, where the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, or DARPA, had for years been the field's single most important source of funding. New legislative restrictions, most significantly the Mansfield Amendment, passed in 1969 and strengthened in 1973, required American defense agencies to fund only research with a direct and demonstrable connection to specific military applications, rather than the open-ended, exploratory research DARPA had generously supported throughout the 1960s. 4 artificial intelligence researchers, many of whom had built entire careers on this kind of unrestricted, curiosity-driven funding, the change was severe. Combined with the broader disappointment following the Lighthill report and the perceptron controversy, funding across the American AI research community contracted sharply through the mid-1970s. By the second half of the decade, the field's first great optimistic wave had largely broken, and researchers who remained found themselves working with a fraction of their earlier resources, on a field many outside observers now viewed with open skepticism. The 1980s brought a genuine, if temporary, revival, built around a more modest and more commercially practical idea, known as expert systems. Rather than attempting to capture general intelligence, expert systems focused narrowly on encoding the specific knowledge of human specialists, doctors, chemists, engineers, into large sets of if-then rules that a computer could apply to solve problems within one tightly defined domain. One widely cited early success was Mycin, developed at Stanford in the 1970s, designed to help diagnose bacterial infections and recommend antibiotic treatments. Perhaps more commercially significant was XCON, developed for the Digital Equipment Corporation beginning in 1978, which helped configure complex computer orders and reportedly saved the company tens of millions of dollars annually by the mid-1980s. This commercial promise fueled a new wave of investment, including Japan's ambitious fifth-generation computer systems project, launched in 1982 with substantial government funding, aiming to leapfrog Western computing entirely through advanced, logic-based artificial intelligence hardware. Specialized computers called Lisp machines, built specifically to run the AI programming language John McCarthy had invented decades earlier, became, briefly, a genuine commercial industry of their own. That revival, however, proved considerably shorter-lived than many had hoped. Expert systems, it turned out, were extraordinarily expensive and labor-intensive to build and maintain. Encoding a genuine specialist's knowledge into explicit rules was slow, painstaking work, and the resulting systems were often brittle, handling routine cases well, while failing badly, sometimes in embarrassing or costly ways, whenever they encountered situations their rules hadn't anticipated. Around 1987, the specialized Lisp machine industry collapsed almost overnight, as increasingly powerful and considerably cheaper general-purpose desktop computers, built by companies like Apple and IBM's competitors, made dedicated AI hardware largely unnecessary. Japan's fifth-generation project, after roughly a decade and hundreds of millions of dollars in investment, quietly concluded in the early 1990s, having fallen well short of its original, extraordinarily ambitious goals. DARPA, facing renewed pressure to demonstrate concrete results, sharply cut its funding for AI research once again in the late 1980s. The phrase AI winter itself was coined during this period, first used publicly at a 1984 meeting of the American Association for Artificial Intelligence, during a panel discussion where researchers, drawing a direct comparison to the concept of nuclear winter, warned one another that a coming collapse in funding and enthusiasm was both foreseeable and, in their view, largely unavoidable. Looking back, both winters shared the same underlying pattern. Genuine, real technical progress, made within narrow, carefully bounded problems, followed by promises that extrapolated that narrow success into sweeping claims about general intelligence, promises the underlying technology, hardware, and available data simply could not yet support. Computing power, throughout this entire period, remained a hard physical constraint. The fastest computers of the 1970s and 1980s were, by later standards, staggeringly limited. And data, the raw material modern approaches would eventually depend on entirely, barely existed yet in usable, digital form. But the winters were not, in the end, a dead end for the field. Beneath the collapsing funding and the fading headlines, a much quieter, far less publicized line of research had continued, patiently, throughout both downturns. That quiet work, largely ignored by the press, and often overlooked even within computer science itself, was steadily building the actual foundation the field would eventually rise on. A damning government report on machine translation, a mathematical proof exposing the limits of an overhyped design, a British inquiry that closed AI programs across an entire country, a change in American law that dried up years of open funding, a brief, genuine commercial revival built on expert systems and specialized hardware, and a second, harsher collapse, as that revival's own limitations became impossible to hide. Twice, in the span of just a few decades, the field of artificial intelligence had risen on genuine promise and fallen under the weight of its own overreaching claims. But even during the coldest of these winters, a small number of researchers kept working, quietly, on an idea that had been largely dismissed since 1969. The idea that a machine might learn, gradually, from data itself, rather than being explicitly told every rule in advance. That quiet, patient work is where our story turns next. The hidden revolution, machine learning. While the field's most public ambitions were collapsing under the weight of the AI winters, a quieter, less glamorous line of research continued, almost entirely out of public view. It began not with a grand claim about general intelligence, but with a much smaller, more careful question. Could a computer improve at a task, gradually, on its own, simply by practicing it? That question would take decades to fully answer, but its earliest, clearest demonstration had, in fact, already appeared, years before the first winter even began. In 1959, an IBM researcher named Arthur Samuel published a paper describing a checkers-playing program he had spent much of the previous decade developing. And in doing so, he coined a phrase that would eventually come to define an entire field: machine learning. Samuel defined it simply as giving a computer the ability to learn without being explicitly programmed for every situation it might encounter. His checkers program didn't rely on a fixed set of rules covering every possible board position, an approach that would have been impossible given the sheer number of ways a checkers game can unfold. Instead, it evaluated positions using a scoring system, and crucially, it played repeated games against itself, gradually adjusting that scoring system based on which strategies tended to lead to wins. By the early 1960s, Samuel's program had improved enough to defeat a strong amateur player, a genuinely striking result for its time. What made it significant wasn't simply that a computer could play checkers well, but how it had gotten there. Not through a programmer anticipating every situation in advance, but through the machine's own accumulated experience. This was the essential shift, the quiet, foundational idea that would carry the field through its coldest years. The difference between telling a machine exactly what to do and giving it a way to discover, for itself, what tends to work. Long before computers existed at all, mathematicians had already developed much of the theoretical machinery that machine learning would eventually depend on. Chief among these tools was a result now known as Bayes' theorem, first developed by the English statistician and Presbyterian minister Thomas Bayes, and published posthumously in 1763, 2 years after his death, by his friend Richard Price. Bayes' theorem describes a precise, mathematical way of updating a belief, or a probability, in light of new evidence. Given some initial assumption about how likely something is to be true, and given new data relevant to that assumption, the theorem provides an exact method for calculating a new, revised probability. This simple but powerful idea, updating belief in light of evidence, would eventually become one of the central engines of machine learning. In its most direct application, a technique called the naive Bayes classifier, which calculates the probability that a piece of data belongs to a particular category based on the individual features it contains, remains, even today, a remarkably effective tool, still used in applications like email spam filtering, more than 2.5 centuries after Bayes first described the underlying mathematics. A closely related thread of research, known as pattern recognition, focused on a deceptively difficult problem: how to teach a machine to correctly categorize things, images, sounds, or written characters that vary constantly in their exact appearance, while still belonging to the same underlying category. An important early contribution came from the statistician and biologist Ronald Fisher, who in 1936 introduced a method now known as linear discriminant analysis. Fisher's technique provided a precise mathematical way to find the best possible boundary for separating different categories of data based on a set of measured characteristics, laying essential groundwork for classification methods that would follow decades later. Through the 1960s and 1970s, these ideas found genuine practical application in optical character recognition, allowing machines to read printed and, eventually, handwritten text, and in early automated systems for reading postal codes and processing bank checks. These applications rarely made headlines, especially compared to the grander promises of the same era, but they represented real, working intelligence of a narrow, useful kind, quietly proving its value in the background. Another significant development came in the form of decision trees, a method for making predictions by asking a structured sequence of simple questions about the data. The idea is intuitive, even without any mathematics attached to it. Imagine trying to determine whether a piece of fruit is an apple or an orange by asking a sequence of questions: is it more red or more orange? Is its surface smooth or slightly textured? And narrowing down the answer step by step until a confident classification can be made. In 1986, the computer scientist Ross Quinlan formalized this approach into an algorithm called ID3, which provided a precise, automated method for determining which questions a decision tree should ask, and in what order, based purely on which questions did the most to reduce uncertainty within a given set of data. Around the same time, the statisticians Leo Breiman, Jerome Friedman, Richard Olshan, and Charles Stone developed a closely related and highly influential method known as CART, or Classification and Regression Trees, published in 1984. Decision trees offered something genuinely valuable that many other techniques of the era lacked. Their reasoning could actually be inspected and understood by a human being simply by following the sequence of questions the tree had learned to ask. In fields like medicine and finance, where explaining why a machine had reached a particular conclusion mattered as much as the conclusion itself, this transparency proved to be a significant advantage. One of the most commercially significant applications of statistical machine learning during this same period was automatic speech recognition. Human speech is remarkably difficult for a machine to interpret directly. The same word, spoken by different people, or even by the same person on different occasions, produces subtly different sound patterns every time. Researchers at IBM, particularly Frederick Jelinek and his colleagues throughout the 1970s and 1980s, made substantial progress using a statistical tool called the hidden Markov model, which treated speech as a sequence of probable transitions between underlying, unobserved states, gradually inferring the most likely sequence of words from an ambiguous, noisy stream of sound. This approach represented a significant philosophical shift for the field. Rather than attempting to hand-code detailed linguistic rules about grammar and pronunciation, as many earlier language processing efforts had tried to do, these systems learned the statistical patterns of speech directly from large collections of recorded audio and transcribed text. It was a quiet preview of a much larger shift the entire field would eventually make, decades later. By the early 1990s, working at Bell Labs, the statistician Vladimir Vapnik, together with several collaborators, developed one of the most mathematically elegant and, for a time, one of the most effective machine learning techniques yet devised: the support vector machine. The core idea, at its simplest, involves finding the best possible dividing line, or boundary, between two categories of data, one that separates them not just correctly, but with the widest possible margin of safety on either side, making the classification as robust as possible against new, slightly different examples. A key 1992 paper, authored by Bernhard Boser, Isabel Guyon, and Vapnik, introduced a particularly powerful refinement, known as the kernel trick, which allowed the technique to find effective boundaries even for data that couldn't be cleanly separated by a simple straight line, by mathematically projecting the data into a higher dimensional space where such a separation became possible. Through the 1990s and into the early 2000s, support vector machines became one of the most widely used and most trusted tools across the entire field, applied successfully to tasks ranging from handwriting recognition to text categorization, and grounded in a rigorous body of statistical theory that gave researchers real mathematical confidence in exactly why, and under what conditions, the technique would work. Taken together, these developments, Samuel's self-improving checkers program, the statistical foundations laid by Bayes and Fisher, decision trees, hidden Markov models, and support vector machines, represented something more significant than any single algorithm. They represented a genuine philosophical shift in how researchers approached the entire problem of machine intelligence, away from the earlier, symbolic approach of the field's first golden age, which had focused on hand-coding explicit rules and logical structures, and toward a fundamentally different strategy, providing a machine with data and a general method for finding patterns within it, and allowing the specific rules to emerge from the data itself. This shift didn't happen all at once, and it wasn't accompanied by the kind of dramatic headlines that had defined the field's first golden age. It happened gradually, patiently, often within the same university departments still recovering from the funding cuts of the AI winters, carried forward by researchers who kept working even when public and institutional interest in artificial intelligence had largely moved elsewhere. A checkers program, quietly teaching itself to improve, game after game. An 18th-century clergyman's theorem, waiting patiently for 200 years to find its true purpose. A statistician's method for drawing careful boundaries between categories. A simple, human-readable tree of questions, learned automatically from data. A statistical model, listening past the noise of human speech, to find the words hidden within it. And an elegant mathematical technique, finding the widest, safest boundary between one category and another. None of this looked much like the bold, sweeping predictions of the 1960s. There was no talk, here, of machines achieving consciousness within a decade. But this quiet, patient, statistically grounded work was building something the earlier Golden Age never had. A genuine, reliable foundation, rooted in mathematics that could be tested, verified, and trusted. And it was setting the stage for one particular idea, borrowed loosely from biology itself, an idea that had been left for dead since 1969, but that was, quietly, about to be given a second chance. Neural networks. Of all the approaches to artificial intelligence explored across this long history, one idea kept returning, again and again, no matter how many times it was set aside. The idea of building a machine not out of explicit rules, and not out of handcrafted statistical formulas, but out of something modeled, however loosely, on the one system already known to produce genuine intelligence, the biological brain. This is the story of the artificial neural network, an idea nearly as old as computing itself, abandoned once, nearly forgotten twice, and destined, eventually, to become the foundation for everything that followed. Our story here actually begins before Dartmouth, before ENIAC, in 1943, with a paper co-written by a neurophysiologist named Warren McCulloch and a young logician named Walter Pitts. Their paper, titled A Logical Calculus of Ideas Immanent in Nervous Activity, attempted something remarkable for its time, a precise mathematical model of how a single biological neuron might function. Inside the brain, a neuron receives electrical signals from other neurons through connections called synapses. If the combined strength of those incoming signals crosses a certain threshold, the neuron fires, sending its own signal onward to the neurons connected to it. If the combined signal is too weak, the neuron stays silent. McCulloch and Pitts showed that this simple firing or silent behavior could be captured mathematically, and, crucially, that networks of these simplified artificial neurons, connected together, could in principle carry out any logical calculation a digital computer could perform. It was a striking, almost prophetic result, arriving years before a working general-purpose computer had even been built. McCulloch and Pitts had described how a neuron might calculate, but their model, as originally conceived, couldn't yet learn. Its connections were fixed, decided in advance by whoever designed the network. That changed, as we touched on earlier in our story, with Frank Rosenblatt's perceptron, introduced in 1958. Rosenblatt's key insight was to attach an adjustable strength, now generally called a weight, to each connection feeding into an artificial neuron. Picture it this way: each incoming connection behaves like a small dial, controlling how much attention that particular neuron pays to that particular piece of information. A high weight means a strong influence, a low or negative weight means a weak, or even opposing, influence. The neuron combines all of its weighted inputs, and if that combination is strong enough, it fires. Learning, in this system, meant something wonderfully concrete. It meant adjusting those dials, gradually, based on whether the network's final answer had been right or wrong. Get an answer wrong, and the dials connected to that mistake are nudged slightly, in whatever direction makes the correct answer a little more likely, next time. As we heard in our earlier chapter on the AI winters, Rosenblatt's original perceptron had a single layer of these adjustable neurons, and in 1969, Marvin Minsky and Seymour Papert proved, rigorously, that a single layer simply wasn't capable of solving certain categories of problems, no matter how its dials were adjusted. The intuitive way to picture this limitation is to imagine trying to separate two groups of dots scattered across a page, using only a single straight line. For many arrangements, this works perfectly well. But for certain patterns, no single straight line, drawn anywhere on the page, can correctly separate the two groups. You would need a curve, or several connected lines, to do the job properly. The mathematical solution to this problem had actually been understood, in principle, for some time. Adding additional layers of artificial neurons, stacked between the input and the final output, so-called hidden layers, gives a network the ability to combine simple straight-line decisions into far more intricate, curved, flexible boundaries. The genuine difficulty wasn't the idea of adding more layers, it was figuring out how to actually train them, how to correctly adjust thousands, or even millions, of individual dials spread across several internal layers, based only on whether the network's final, single answer had been right or wrong. The solution to that problem, an algorithm known as backpropagation, had actually been described, in various partial forms, as early as 1974, in a doctoral dissertation written by Paul Werbos. But it was a 1986 paper, authored by David Rumelhart, Jeffrey Hinton, and Ronald Williams, that brought the technique to the field's wider attention and demonstrated, clearly and convincingly, that it could be used to train genuinely useful, multi-layered neural networks. The core idea behind backpropagation is easier to grasp through an analogy than through its underlying mathematics. Imagine a long relay chain of people passing a message from one person to the next until it finally reaches its destination, slightly garbled along the way. If the final message comes out wrong and you want to fix the process, the most useful approach isn't to only blame the very last person in the chain. It's to trace the error backward, step by step, figuring out how much each individual person along the way contributed to the final mistake, and asking each of them to adjust, just slightly next time. That, in essence, is what backpropagation does. When a neural network produces an incorrect answer, the algorithm calculates precisely how much each individual connection, all the way back through every hidden layer, contributed to that particular mistake, and adjusts each one accordingly by a small, carefully calculated amount. Repeat that process across thousands or millions of examples, each time nudging every weight in a slightly better direction, and the network gradually, patiently, improves. This gradual, repeated nudging process is often described, in more technical terms, as gradient descent. But the underlying idea is simply this: learn a little from every mistake, and let those small corrections accumulate into genuine skill. One of the most genuinely elegant discoveries to emerge from this research was what, specifically, these hidden layers tend to learn when trained on real-world data such as images. Researchers found that, quite consistently, the earliest layers of a trained network tend to learn to recognize extremely simple visual features, edges, corners, and basic changes in brightness or color. The next layers tend to combine those simple features into slightly more complex shapes, curves, textures, and small recognizable patterns. And the deepest layers, furthest from the raw input, tend to combine those intermediate patterns into genuinely high-level concepts, recognizing an eye, a wheel, a particular kind of face. No one explicitly programmed a network to organize its understanding this way. This layered structure of simple features building into complex concepts emerged naturally, purely as a consequence of the training process itself, discovered independently, again and again, across countless different trained networks. It's a structure that also bears a genuine resemblance, at least at a broad conceptual level, to how researchers understand certain layers of visual processing to work within the biological brain itself. An echo, however imperfect, of the original inspiration behind the entire idea. The 1986 backpropagation paper reignited genuine, serious interest in neural networks throughout the research community, and through the late 1980s and early 1990s, researchers demonstrated a range of promising results, including, notably, early systems capable of recognizing handwritten digits, an application with direct, practical use in automatically processing checks and postal mail. And yet, despite this renewed enthusiasm, neural networks did not immediately dominate the field. Training genuinely deep networks, with many internal layers, remained extraordinarily difficult in practice, hampered by two persistent, stubborn limitations. The computing hardware of the era simply wasn't fast enough to train large networks in any reasonable amount of time, and the vast quantities of labeled data that deep networks tend to need in order to learn effectively simply didn't exist yet, in usable, digital form. Throughout the 1990s and much of the 2000s, other techniques, including the support vector machines we explored in our previous chapter, frequently outperformed neural networks on many practical tasks, and much of the research community's attention drifted, once again, elsewhere. But a small number of researchers, Geoffrey Hinton prominent among them, continued to believe, patiently, and for years without much support from the wider field, that neural networks held genuine, unrealized potential. They simply needed two things the era could not yet provide: considerably more computing power and considerably more data. Looking back, the story of the neural network across nearly 7 decades is really a story about timing, as much as it is about any single idea. McCulloch and Pitts had the essential mathematical concept in 1943, decades before a computer existed that could meaningfully use it. Rosenblatt had a working learning machine in 1958, but its single layer was mathematically too limited for genuinely difficult problems. Rumelhart, Hinton, and Williams had a working method for training deeper, more capable networks, by 1986, but the computing hardware and available data of that era still weren't sufficient to unlock its true potential. Every piece of the eventual solution had, in some form, already been discovered and rediscovered, well before it could actually be put to full use. What the idea needed, more than any further refinement, was simply room to grow, more processing power, and far more data than had ever previously existed. A single neuron, mathematically described before any computer existed to simulate it. A learning machine with adjustable dials, limited by a single layer. A proof of that limitation, patient enough to wait 15 years for its answer. An algorithm for tracing blame backward through a network, layer by careful layer, and a small, patient group of researchers, believing in an idea the rest of the field had largely set aside. Everything necessary for the deep learning revolution to come was, by the late 1980s, already sitting quietly on the table. The neurons, the layers, the training method, even glimpses of the very features these networks would eventually learn to recognize. What remained missing was simply scale. More computing power than nearly anyone, at the time, thought would ever be affordable, and more data than anyone, at the time, thought would ever be available. Both of those things, quietly, and for reasons that had little to do with artificial intelligence at all, were about to arrive. Deep learning changes everything. Everything the neural network idea had been waiting for, computing power, and vast quantities of usable data, began arriving quietly, from directions almost no one in the field had anticipated. Not from a defense agency, and not from a university laboratory alone, but from video game graphics cards, and from the sudden, explosive growth of the internet itself, filling with more images, more text, and more recorded speech than had ever existed in human history. What followed, across roughly one remarkable decade, transformed artificial intelligence from a quiet academic pursuit into one of the most consequential technologies of the 21st century. One of the earliest genuinely practical successes of deep neural networks came from a researcher named Yann LeCun, working at Bell Labs in the late 1980s and 1990s. LeCun developed a specialized type of neural network, called a convolutional neural network, specifically designed to process visual information efficiently. Rather than treating every pixel of an image as an entirely independent piece of information, LeCun's architecture, first fully demonstrated in a system called Narrated in 1989, and refined further through the 1990s, scanned small, overlapping patches of an image, gradually building up an understanding of shapes and patterns, layer by layer, in a way that mirrored some of what researchers understood about how the visual cortex itself processes information. By the late 1990s, LeCun's networks were reading handwritten digits accurately enough for real commercial use, and were deployed to automatically read handwritten numbers on bank checks, processing a meaningful percentage of all checks written in the United States at the time. It was a genuinely practical, working deployment of deep learning, years before the term deep learning itself had come into common use. For most of the 1990s and early 2000s, however, training genuinely deep networks, with many internal layers, remained frustratingly difficult. Networks with too many layers often failed to train effectively at all, a problem researchers came to call the vanishing gradient problem, in which the error signal used to adjust each layer's weights grew weaker and weaker the further it traveled backward through the network. In 2006, Geoffrey Hinton, along with colleagues Simon O. Sendero and Yi Tay, published a paper describing a technique for training deep networks one layer at a time, allowing each layer to first learn a reasonable initial structure on its own, before the entire network was fine-tuned together. This method, applied to what Hinton called deep belief networks, offered a genuine, practical path around the training difficulties that had stalled progress for years. This paper is often credited, within the field, as the moment that formally reignited serious research interest in deep neural networks, and it helped establish the specific term deep learning as the field's preferred name for this renewed line of research. Around this same period, an entirely unrelated industry was quietly solving the field's second great obstacle, a persistent, severe shortage of raw computing power. Graphics processing units, or GPUs, had been developed by companies like NVIDIA primarily to render fast, realistic images for video games, a task that requires performing enormous numbers of simple mathematical calculations simultaneously, rather than one at a time. Researchers gradually realized that this exact capability, extremely fast, highly parallel calculation, was almost perfectly suited to the mathematics underlying neural network training, which similarly requires adjusting enormous numbers of individual weights simultaneously across every training example. In 2006 and 2007, NVIDIA released a programming platform called CUDA, allowing researchers, for the first time, to write general-purpose scientific and mathematical code that could run directly on a graphics card, rather than being limited to graphics rendering alone. What had once required an expensive, specialized supercomputer could now be approximated using consumer gaming hardware, at a small fraction of the cost, and increasingly, a small fraction of the time. The final missing ingredient, sufficient data, arrived through the work of a computer scientist named Fei Li, then a professor at Princeton, and shortly afterward, at Stanford. Beginning around 2007, Li and her collaborators set out to build something that hadn't previously existed at this scale, a massive, carefully labeled collection of images, organized according to a large hierarchical structure of real-world categories. The resulting dataset, called ImageNet, launched publicly in 2009, eventually grew to include more than 14 million labeled images, spanning more than 20,000 distinct categories. Beginning in 2010, Li's team organized an annual public competition, the ImageNet Large-Scale Visual Recognition Challenge, inviting researchers from around the world to submit systems designed to correctly classify images drawn from this enormous dataset. For its first 2 years, the competition's winning systems used earlier, more conventional techniques, and made only modest, incremental improvements. Then came 2012. In 2012, a team from the University of Toronto, consisting of graduate students Alex Krashevsky and Ilya Sutskever, working under Geoffrey Hinton's supervision, entered the ImageNet competition with a deep convolutional neural network trained directly on consumer NVIDIA GPUs. Their system, which came to be known as AlexNet, didn't simply win the competition. It won by a margin that stunned nearly every researcher watching. Where the previous year's leading system had achieved an error rate of roughly 26%, AlexNet's error rate fell to approximately 15%, an improvement so large that many researchers initially assumed some kind of mistake had been made. There was no mistake. AlexNet's success demonstrated, conclusively and publicly, that the combination Hinton and a small number of colleagues had been quietly betting on for years, deep neural networks, trained on GPUs, using genuinely large datasets, wasn't merely a promising research direction. It was, decisively, the most effective approach the field had ever produced for this entire category of problem. Within just a few years following AlexNet's victory, deep convolutional networks had become the standard approach not just for the ImageNet competition, but for computer vision research worldwide. And the underlying recipe, more data, more computing power, and deeper networks, began producing rapid, compounding improvements across an increasingly wide range of tasks. The success of deep learning in image recognition quickly rippled outward into other domains that had been quietly struggling with the same underlying limitations. Around 2009 through 2012, researchers including Geoffrey Hinton, working alongside colleagues at Microsoft, Google, and IBM, demonstrated that deep neural networks could substantially outperform the hidden Markov model approaches that had dominated speech recognition for decades, producing some of the largest single improvements in speech recognition accuracy the field had seen in years. By the mid-2010s, deep learning systems had become the standard approach across an enormous range of practical applications, powering everything from the voice recognition built into smartphones, to automatic photo tagging, to increasingly capable systems for detecting objects, faces, and even specific medical conditions within images, sometimes matching, or in narrow, well-defined tasks, even exceeding the accuracy of trained human specialists. Perhaps no single event demonstrated deep learning's new capabilities to the general public as vividly as a match played in Seoul, South Korea, in March of 2016. A research organization called DeepMind, founded in London in 2010 by neuroscientist and former chess prodigy Demis Hassabis, along with Shane Legg and Mustafa Suleyman, and acquired by Google in 2014, had spent years developing a system called AlphaGo, designed to master the ancient board game of Go. Go had long been considered a far greater challenge for artificial intelligence than chess, owing to its almost incomprehensibly vast number of possible board positions, a number that exceeds the count of atoms in the observable universe, and to the fact that skilled human players often describe their best moves as a matter of intuition, rather than calculation. AlphaGo combined deep neural networks, trained on both human expert games and extensive self-play, with a search technique called Monte Carlo tree search, allowing it to evaluate promising future positions with remarkable, and at times startlingly creative, effectiveness. Over 5 games, AlphaGo faced Lee Sedol, one of the strongest professional Go players in the world, and defeated him 4 games to 1. The match was broadcast internationally, watched by an estimated 200 million people, and included at least one specific move, made during the second game, that professional commentators described, in the moment, as unlike anything a human player had ever attempted. A move so unusual it initially struck expert observers as a mistake, before revealing itself, several moves later, as a profound strategic insight. The following year, in 2017, DeepMind released an even more striking successor, AlphaGo Zero, which learned to play Go entirely through self-play, without ever studying a single game played by a human being, and within days surpassed the very version of AlphaGo that had defeated Lee Sedol. A convolutional network, quietly reading handwritten checks years before the phrase deep learning existed, a 2006 paper, offering a practical path through a training problem that had stalled the field for years. A video game industry's graphics cards, unexpectedly becoming the engine of a computing revolution. A Stanford professor's 14 million image dataset, built patiently over years for exactly this moment. A graduate student team's stunning 2012 competition victory, and a 5-game match in Seoul, watched by 200 million people, that made the entire world pay attention. Every piece the field had been quietly assembling for nearly 70 years, McCulloch and Pitt's mathematical neuron, Rosenblatt's adjustable weights, Rumelhart and Hinton's backpropagation, had finally found the 2 things it had always been missing: sufficient computing power and sufficient data. And with both of those pieces now firmly in place, one final architectural idea, introduced by a small team of researchers in 2017, was about to combine everything that came before it into something genuinely new. The Transformer Revolution. By the mid-2010s, deep learning had transformed computer vision and made real progress in speech recognition. But language, the full, flexible complexity of human sentences, paragraphs, and conversation, remained stubbornly difficult. The breakthrough that finally unlocked genuine progress in this domain arrived in 2017. In a paper with an unusually confident title, "Attention is all you need." That paper introduced an architecture called the transformer, and within just a few years, it would become the foundation for nearly every major advance in artificial intelligence that followed. To understand why the transformer mattered so much, it helps to understand what came before it. Earlier neural networks designed to process language, particularly a design called the recurrent neural network, worked by reading text one word at a time, in strict sequence, carrying forward a kind of running summary as they went, much like reading a sentence aloud, word by word, while trying to hold its meaning in your head. This approach had two serious limitations. First, it was slow, because each word had to be processed only after the previous one had finished, making it very difficult to take full advantage of modern, highly parallel computing hardware. Second, and more subtly, it struggled with long-range connections, often losing track of information from early in a long sentence or paragraph by the time it reached the end. A refinement called the long short-term memory network, developed by Sepp Hochreiter and Jürgen Schmidhuber in 1997, helped considerably, giving these networks a kind of dedicated internal memory, but the fundamental limitation of reading strictly in order remained. A crucial piece of the eventual solution actually arrived a few years earlier, in 2014, through work by researchers Dmitry Bodanov, Kyung-Hyun Cho, and Yoshua Benjo, focused specifically on machine translation. Their innovation, called an attention mechanism, allowed a network translating a sentence to look back across the entire original sentence, at every step of producing its translation, and decide, dynamically, which specific words deserved the most focus at that particular moment. Rather than compressing an entire sentence into a single fixed summary and hoping nothing important had been lost, the network could instead glance back, repeatedly, at exactly the parts of the original sentence most relevant to whatever word it was currently trying to produce. This idea of letting a network dynamically focus its attention on the most relevant available information proved to be extraordinarily powerful, and it set the stage for an even bolder question. What if attention alone, without the older step-by-step recurrent reading process at all, was enough? That question was answered directly in the 2017 paper, written by a team of researchers at Google, including Ashish Vaswani, Noam Shazir, and several colleagues. Their architecture, the transformer, relied entirely on a technique called self-attention. The easiest way to picture self-attention is to imagine every single word in a sentence briefly, looking around at every other word in that same sentence, all at once, and deciding how relevant each of those other words is to understanding its own meaning in this particular context. Consider a sentence like, "The trophy didn't fit in the suitcase because it was too big." Understanding what "it" refers to, the trophy or the suitcase, requires weighing the entire sentence's context, not just reading in a strict, forward order. A self-attention mechanism allows the network to do exactly this, letting the word "it" directly connect to and weigh both candidate words, trophy and suitcase, and settle on the most probable connection based on everything else the sentence contains. Because every word can attend to every other word simultaneously, rather than waiting in a long sequential line, this entire process can be calculated in parallel, taking full advantage of the same kind of GPU hardware that had already transformed image recognition. This was the paper's central, decisive insight. Attention, applied to the entire input all at once, really was all you needed. The older, slower sequential reading process could simply be removed altogether. Before a transformer can process any of this, language first has to be translated into a form mathematics can actually work with. Text is first broken down into smaller units called tokens, which are often, though not always, whole words. Longer or less common words are frequently split into smaller meaningful pieces, called subwords, allowing the system to handle rare words, unusual names, and even entirely new words it has never encountered before by assembling them from familiar fragments. Each token is then converted into a list of numbers, called an embedding, representing that token's meaning as a specific location within a vast, high-dimensional mathematical space. Words with related meanings tend to end up positioned near one another within this space. An especially striking demonstration of this came from earlier embedding research, published by Google researcher Tomas Mikolov and colleagues in 2013, working on a related but simpler technique called word-to-vec. Researchers found that these learned embeddings captured genuine semantic relationships, almost like a form of mathematical analogy. Taking the position of the word king, subtracting the position of man, and adding the position of woman, reliably landed extremely close to the position of the word queen, a relationship the network had never been explicitly taught, but had discovered entirely on its own, simply by learning from patterns across enormous quantities of text. Once the transformer architecture had demonstrated its effectiveness, researchers began pursuing a strategy that, on its surface, sounded almost too simple to work. Making these networks dramatically larger, training them on dramatically larger quantities of text, using dramatically more computing power. In 2020, researchers at OpenAI, led by Jared Kaplan, published influential findings, often referred to as scaling laws, demonstrating a surprisingly smooth, predictable relationship between a model's size, the amount of data and computing power used to train it, and its resulting performance. Within a meaningful range, simply making these three ingredients bigger reliably produced better results, in a way that could be estimated in advance, almost like a physical law. This finding reshaped the field's strategy substantially. A significant portion of subsequent progress came not from entirely new architectural breakthroughs, but from applying the existing transformer architecture at previously unimaginable scale. OpenAI's own GPT series traced this progression directly from GPT in 2018 to GPT-2 in 2019, whose initial capabilities prompted genuine public debate about responsible release, to GPT-3 in 2020, trained with 175 billion internal parameters, a scale that would have been considered essentially unthinkable just a few years earlier. These large language models, at their most basic technical level, were trained to do something conceptually simple: predict the next word or token in a sequence of text based on everything that came before it, over and over, across truly enormous quantities of text drawn from books, websites, and countless other sources. But a model trained purely to predict likely next words doesn't automatically know how to be a helpful, safe, well-behaved conversational assistant. A further refinement, generally known as instruction tuning, combined with a technique called reinforcement learning from human feedback, helped bridge that gap, training models to follow instructions helpfully, and to better align their responses with what human users and evaluators actually found useful, accurate, and appropriate. This refinement led directly to ChatGPT, released by OpenAI at the end of November 2022, which reached an estimated 100 million users within roughly 2 months, becoming, at the time, one of the fastest-growing consumer applications in history, and introducing millions of ordinary people, for the first time, to a genuinely fluent, capable conversational AI system. Other major research organizations soon released their own large language models, built on closely related principles. Anthropic, founded in 2021 by a group of researchers with a particular focus on AI safety, began releasing its Claude models in 2023. Google combined its Google Brain and DeepMind research divisions and released its Gemini models beginning in December of 2023. And a growing ecosystem of openly released models, including Meta's Llama series, beginning in 2023, allowed researchers, and eventually the wider public, to study, adapt, and build upon this technology directly, rather than accessing it only through a small number of large commercial providers. Looking back, the Transformers' true significance wasn't any single, dramatic new capability. It was that its architecture turned out to be remarkably general and remarkably good at simply getting bigger without breaking. The same fundamental design, refined and scaled, proved capable of generating fluent text, writing functional computer code, describing the contents of images, and, in some of its most recent forms, working across text, images, and audio within a single unified system. A design first published to solve a fairly specific problem in machine translation had turned out to be something closer to a genuinely general architecture for processing information itself. A limitation in how earlier networks read language, one careful word at a time. An attention mechanism, first built to improve translation, learning to glance across an entire sentence at once. A 2017 paper, betting that attention alone, without any sequential reading at all, would be enough. Word embeddings, discovering meaningful relationships between words entirely on their own. A set of scaling laws, turning make it bigger into a genuine, predictable research strategy. And a conversational release in November of 2022 that brought this entire 70-year story directly into ordinary daily life for hundreds of millions of people, almost overnight. The dream that began with a bronze giant on the shores of Crete and passed through mathematics, through Turing, through 2 long winters, and through a decade of quiet, patient machine learning research, had finally arrived somewhere genuinely new. Machines that could not only calculate and not only recognize patterns, but could read and write and converse in something remarkably close to ordinary human language. And now, having traced how we arrived here, our story turns to where these systems actually stand today. AI today. Having traced this story across nearly 3,000 years, from bronze myths to mathematics, from Turing's careful questions to the vast, attention-driven language models of today, it's worth pausing here, gently, to take stock of where all of it has actually led. Not where it might go, not yet, but simply, quietly, where things genuinely stand, right now, across the many different corners of daily life these systems have quietly reached into. Perhaps the most immediately familiar way people encounter artificial intelligence today is through writing and conversation. Large language models can now draft emails, summarize lengthy documents, translate between dozens of languages with genuine fluency, and hold sustained, coherent conversations across a remarkable range of topics. Professional translators increasingly work alongside these systems rather than starting entirely from scratch, using them to produce a strong first draft, which a human then refines for accuracy, tone, and cultural nuance. It's worth noting, gently, that these systems remain imperfect. They can state incorrect information with the same fluent confidence as correct information, a limitation researchers often call hallucination. And thoughtful use of these tools generally still involves a human reviewing, questioning, and verifying what the system produces rather than accepting it uncritically. Software development has been transformed considerably by these same underlying systems. Tools like GitHub Copilot, built on large language models and first released in 2021, can suggest entire lines or even entire functions of working computer code based simply on a programmer's comments or the surrounding context of what they're already writing. Surveys of professional developers have consistently found that a large majority now use some form of AI assistance in their daily work, often reporting meaningful gains in speed for routine, well-understood programming tasks. These tools tend to work best as a capable collaborator rather than a fully autonomous replacement. They excel at generating familiar patterns quickly, but still benefit from a human developer's judgment, particularly for complex architectural decisions and for carefully checking the security and correctness of what they produce. In medicine, artificial intelligence has moved from an interesting research curiosity to a genuine, deployed clinical tool. Deep learning systems trained on large collections of medical images have demonstrated the ability to detect certain conditions, including some forms of diabetic retinopathy, skin cancer, and specific patterns in mammograms, at accuracy levels that, in carefully controlled studies, rival or in some cases exceed those of experienced human specialists. Though these systems are typically deployed to assist a physician's judgment rather than to replace it entirely. Perhaps the single most significant scientific achievement in this domain came from DeepMind, whose system AlphaFold, in 2020, achieved a breakthrough that had eluded biologists for decades, predicting, with remarkable accuracy, the three-dimensional physical structure a protein will fold into, based solely on its underlying genetic sequence. This achievement was significant enough that Demis Hassabis, along with his DeepMind colleague John Jumper, was awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 2024, a recognition of just how deeply this technology had begun to reshape biological science itself. Beyond medicine specifically, artificial intelligence has become a genuine research partner across many branches of science. In material science, researchers have used AI systems to help identify promising new candidate materials for batteries, solar cells, and other applications, dramatically narrowing down vast search spaces that would take human researchers, working alone, many years to explore manually. In climate science, machine learning models increasingly assist with weather forecasting and with modeling complex, long-term climate patterns. And across drug discovery more broadly, pharmaceutical researchers now routinely use AI systems to help identify promising molecular candidates in the earliest stages of development, potentially shortening a process that has traditionally taken many years and enormous financial investment before a single new treatment ever reaches a patient. Progress in the physical world, robots that can perceive, move, and manipulate their environment, has generally advanced more slowly and more unevenly than progress in purely digital domains like text and image generation. Even so, meaningful advances have emerged. Autonomous vehicle companies, including Waymo, have deployed self-driving taxi services without a human safety driver behind the wheel across parts of several American cities. In industrial and warehouse settings, robotic systems increasingly handle sorting, packing, and moving physical goods, often working alongside human employees rather than fully replacing them. And research labs, including Boston Dynamics, have continued to demonstrate robots with increasingly sophisticated, fluid physical movement and balance. The physical world, it turns out, presents genuinely different challenges than the digital one. Unpredictable lighting, unexpected obstacles, and the sheer physical variability of the real world remain considerably harder for a machine to reliably navigate than the comparatively clean, structured world of text and digital images. Perhaps unexpectedly, some of the most publicly visible recent advances have come in creative, artistic domains, once widely assumed to be among the most distinctly and durably human. Image generation systems, including DALL-E, Midjourney, and Stable Diffusion, all becoming widely accessible around 2022, can now produce detailed, often strikingly polished images from simple written descriptions. Music generation tools can compose original pieces in a requested style, and emerging video generation systems can now produce short, increasingly coherent video clips directly from text descriptions. These tools have prompted genuine, ongoing debate among artists, musicians, filmmakers, and legal scholars concerning questions of copyright, the fair use of existing creative work in training these systems, and what, exactly, authorship and creativity mean when a machine is involved somewhere in the process. These are not simple, settled questions, and they remain actively discussed across the creative industries and in courts even now. Beyond these specific domains, artificial intelligence has increasingly woven itself into the ordinary texture of daily life. Voice assistants, recommendation systems suggesting what to watch or listen to next, and customer service chat tools have become commonplace across countless websites and applications. In business, AI systems increasingly assist with tasks like analyzing large datasets, drafting routine documents, and automating repetitive administrative work, freeing employees, ideally, for tasks requiring more judgment, creativity, or direct human interaction. In education, AI tutoring systems can now provide a degree of personalized, adaptive practice once available, in practice, only to students with access to individual human tutors, adjusting the difficulty and style of explanations based on how a particular student is responding. And accessibility tools, including increasingly accurate real-time captioning, text-to-speech, and image description for visually impaired users, have quietly extended these same underlying technologies toward making daily life more navigable for people with a wide range of different needs. A writing assistant, drafting and translating, imperfect but increasingly capable. A coding companion, suggesting entire functions in an eye blink. A diagnostic tool, catching patterns a tired human eye might miss. A protein folding breakthrough, significant enough to earn a Nobel Prize. A scientific collaborator, narrowing years of search into months. A taxi, driving itself through city streets without anyone at the wheel. An image, or a song, or a short film, conjured from nothing. More than a written description, and countless small, quiet moments throughout an ordinary day, where a machine, in the background, is gently smoothing something that once required considerably more human effort. This is roughly where things stand, right now, in the middle of this story's most recent chapter. Not a single dramatic arrival of some clearly defined artificial intelligence, but instead, a wide, uneven, rapidly expanding set of specific, genuinely useful capabilities, each one still bounded by real limitations, each one still requiring thoughtful human judgment somewhere in the loop. And naturally, having come this far, it's worth wondering, gently, and without any end. The future. Every chapter of this story, up to this point, has described something that has already happened. This final chapter is different. Here, we step gently past the edge of settled history, into territory that remains genuinely, honestly uncertain. Thoughtful, well-informed researchers disagree, sometimes considerably, about much of what follows. So rather than offering firm predictions, this chapter simply explores several of the possibilities these researchers are currently discussing, seriously, and in detail. Much of the current conversation about the future of this field centers on a term you may have already heard: artificial general intelligence, often abbreviated as AGI. The term generally refers to a system capable of performing, at a human level or beyond, essentially any intellectual task a human being can perform, rather than excelling narrowly within one specific domain, the way today's systems typically do. What's genuinely important to understand, though, is that there is no single, universally agreed upon definition of exactly what this would mean, or precisely how researchers would confirm, with confidence, that it had actually arrived. Some researchers focus on breadth of capability, others on genuine adaptability to entirely novel situations, and others still question whether the concept, as commonly discussed, is even clearly enough defined to be a meaningful target at all. Perhaps nowhere is expert disagreement more visible than in predictions about timing. Surveys of AI researchers, conducted periodically over the past decade, have consistently found an extraordinarily wide range of opinion. Some prominent researchers and industry leaders have suggested that systems with broadly general capabilities could arrive within just a few years. Others, drawing on the field's long history of repeated overconfidence, the same pattern we traced earlier tonight, through the optimism of the 1960s and the winters that followed, urge considerably more caution, suggesting such capabilities may remain decades away, or may require conceptual breakthroughs that haven't yet been discovered at all. This disagreement isn't a sign of confusion or incompetence among these researchers. It reflects a genuine, difficult uncertainty about how current techniques will continue to scale, and about whether entirely new ideas, beyond simply making today's systems larger, will ultimately prove necessary. One plausible, and already partially visible, direction involves AI systems taking on an increasingly active role in scientific discovery itself. Building on early successes like AlphaFold's protein structure predictions, researchers are exploring systems capable of generating novel scientific hypotheses, designing and even helping to run physical experiments, and identifying subtle patterns across enormous scientific datasets that would be genuinely difficult for a human researcher to notice unaided. Some researchers describe a plausible future in which AI systems function less like a tool a scientist occasionally consults, and more like a genuine collaborator, actively contributing ideas throughout the entire research process. Whether and how quickly this vision becomes routine across science remains an open, actively studied question. In medicine, many researchers anticipate a continued, gradual expansion of AI's role as a diagnostic and monitoring aid, potentially including systems capable of continuously analyzing data from wearable health devices, flagging subtle, early warning signs of illness well before symptoms become noticeable to a patient or their doctor. In education, some researchers envision AI tutoring systems capable of genuinely adapting, in real time, to an individual student's specific pace, learning style, and areas of difficulty, in a way that begins to approach the kind of personalized attention traditionally available only through one-on-one human tutoring. In both domains, a recurring, carefully considered question concerns the appropriate balance between AI assistance and human judgment. Most researchers and practitioners currently envision these systems as augmenting, rather than replacing, human doctors and teachers, though the precise, evolving boundary between the two remains a genuinely active subject of debate. As we discussed earlier, progress in robotics has generally moved more slowly than progress in purely digital systems, and many researchers expect that pattern to continue, at least for some time. Even so, meaningful, gradual progress in robotics seems, to many in the field, genuinely likely, potentially including more capable robots for elder care, for hazardous or physically demanding work, and for tasks in space exploration and deep-sea research, environments too dangerous or too remote for routine human presence. A related, more socially complex area concerns AI companions, conversational systems designed specifically for social interaction and emotional support. Researchers, ethicists, and psychologists hold genuinely varied views on this particular direction, some seeing real potential benefit, particularly for isolated or lonely individuals, and others raising thoughtful, serious concerns about the nature and depth of the emotional connections such systems might encourage, and how those relationships might shape human well-being over time. A more speculative, but genuinely active area of research involves direct interfaces between the human brain and computing systems. Current brain-computer interface research, including work by companies like Neuralink and by numerous academic research groups, has focused primarily on medical applications, particularly restoring movement or communication ability to individuals with severe paralysis or specific neurological conditions. Some researchers discuss considerably more expansive, longer-term possibilities, including direct, high-bandwidth communication between the human brain and AI systems. Others remain genuinely skeptical about both the near-term feasibility and the underlying desirability of pursuing such direct integration at broader scale. This entire area remains, for now, considerably more exploratory than the other developments discussed tonight. Finally, some researchers point toward quantum computing as a potential, longer-term complement to current AI approaches. Quantum computers, which use fundamentally different physical principles than traditional digital computers, may, in time, prove particularly well suited to certain categories of problems relevant to AI, including specific kinds of optimization and simulation tasks. The technology, however, remains in a comparatively early stage of development, and meaningful, practical integration with mainstream AI systems, most researchers agree, likely remains a genuinely longer-term prospect. Looking further outward still, AI systems already play a substantial, ongoing role in space exploration, from autonomously navigating rovers on the surface of Mars to analyzing vast quantities of astronomical data in the ongoing search for exoplanets, to assisting in the increasingly complex mission planning required for extended, long-duration spaceflight. A general intelligence, still without any single, agreed-upon definition, let alone an agreed-upon date of arrival, expert timelines spanning years or decades, depending entirely on who you ask, and why, a scientific collaborator, already showing early, genuine promise, doctors and teachers, gradually assisted, though not yet replaced, robots and companions, and questions about connection that remain genuinely unresolved, brain and machine, tentatively exploring a more direct connection and a search for patterns, continuing steadily outward toward the stars themselves. None of this is certain. Much of it is sincerely, thoughtfully debated by the very researchers working closest to it. What does seem clear, looking back across everything we've traced together tonight, is simply this. The dream that began with a bronze giant on the shores of Crete has never stopped moving forward, has never stopped changing shape, and shows very little sign, even now, of finally coming to rest. We've traveled a very long way tonight. Nearly 3,000 years, across dozens of cultures, hundreds of individual lives, and one single, quietly persistent question. Before we close, let's rest here for a while, and simply retrace the shape of the path we've walked. Our journey began not with technology at all, but with imagination. A bronze giant, circling the shores of Crete, disabled by the loss of a single pin. A figure of clay, in Prague, animated by sacred letters, carrying the seed of an idea that would echo for centuries. A leather performer in ancient China, briefly mistaken for something living. A programmable, water-powered orchestra, built with genuine precision in the Islamic Golden Age. A mechanical knight, sketched by Da Vinci's careful hand. A duck that seemed to eat and to digest. None of these cultures had electricity. None of them had mathematics as we understand it today. What they had was a question, asked quietly, again and again, in dozens of languages, across thousands of years. Could something built ever act like something alive? That question, eventually, needed a language precise enough to be tested. Euclid gave the world proof, built patiently from simple, self-evident truths. Al-Khwarizmi gave it procedure, a fixed set of steps that could be followed exactly, and would always arrive at the same answer. Leibniz dreamed, centuries before it was possible, of a universal language for reasoning itself. Boole finally built that language, reducing logic to algebra, to nothing more than true and false. Babbage designed a machine capable of following any set of instructions. And Ada Lovelace, seeing further than anyone else around her, understood that such a machine might one day reason about far more than numbers alone. Mathematics, eventually, needed a body. A telegraph line, carrying messages as pulses of electric current. A vacuum tube, switching current thousands of times each second. Conrad Zeuss's Z3, quietly running on binary logic in wartime Berlin. Colossus, breaking Germany's ciphers in the English countryside, its existence kept secret for 30 years. ENIAC, filling an entire room, its instructions painstakingly rewired by hand, by a team of brilliant women largely uncredited for decades. And a stored program design, from John von Neumann, that still, in its essential structure, shapes nearly every computer built since. And at the very heart of this part of the story, one particular life. A boy who lost his closest friend and began quietly wondering what thought truly was. A young mathematician who imagined an impossibly simple machine made of nothing more than a tape and a handful of rules, and in doing so, defined the outer boundary of computation itself. A codebreaker whose secret work helped end a war, and whose story remained hidden from the world for 30 years. A philosopher who asked, carefully, what it might mean for a machine to think, and proposed a simple, elegant test that would shape this field for the rest of the century. And a man, ultimately, destroyed not by any failure of his own extraordinary mind, but by the prejudice of the era he happened to live in. Alan Turing never saw almost any of what his questions eventually built, but nearly everything that followed, in some quiet way, passes back through him. In the summer of 1956, a small gathering in New Hampshire finally gave this ancient dream a name: artificial intelligence. And for the better part of 2 decades, the researchers who carried that name forward believed, sincerely, that the deepest mysteries of human thought might be solved within a single working career. A theorem-proving program, a general problem solver, a conversational script mistaken for genuine empathy, a small world of blocks and pyramids, mistaken for a solved theory of language. Real progress genuinely made, but consistently and confidently overextended. That overextension eventually met its reckoning. A government report ending machine translation funding almost overnight. A mathematical proof exposing the limits of an overhyped design and setting neural networks aside for 15 years. A British inquiry closing AI research at nearly every university across an entire country. A brief, genuine commercial revival built on expert systems, and a second, harsher collapse, as that revival's own limitations became impossible to hide. Twice, in the span of a few decades, this field rose on real promise and fell under the weight of its own overreaching claims. The quiet work that continued. But even through the coldest years, work continued, quietly, out of the public eye. A checkers program, teaching itself to improve, one game at a time. An 18th century clergyman's theorem, waiting 200 years to find its true purpose. A simple, human-readable tree of questions, learned automatically from data. A statistical model, listening past the noise of human speech to find the words inside it. An elegant mathematical boundary, drawn between one category and another. This was the field's hidden foundation, built patiently, while the world's attention had largely moved elsewhere. And underneath all of it, one particular idea kept quietly returning. A single neuron, mathematically described before any computer existed to run it. A learning machine with adjustable dials, limited by a single layer. An algorithm for tracing blame backward, layer by careful layer, finally making deeper networks trainable. And a small, patient group of researchers who kept believing, for years, that this idea simply needed more room to grow. That room, eventually, arrived. A video game industry's graphics cards, unexpectedly becoming a computing revolution. A 14 million image dataset built patiently for exactly this moment. A graduate student team's stunning 2012 victory. And a 5-game match in Seoul, watched by 200 million people, that made the entire world finally take notice. One final architectural idea, arriving in 2017, finally allowed all of this to reach language itself. Self-attention, letting every word in a sentence weigh every other word, all at once. Meaning, translated into mathematical space, close enough that king minus man plus woman reliably landed near queen. Scaling laws, turning make it bigger into genuine, predictable strategy. And a conversational release at the end of 2022 that brought this entire 70-year story directly into ordinary daily life for hundreds of millions of people, almost overnight. And so, we arrive at tonight, at systems that can write and translate and suggest working computer code and predict how a protein will fold and drive a car through city streets and compose a short piece of music from nothing more than a written description. Genuinely useful, genuinely remarkable, and still, in countless important ways, bounded, imperfect, and dependent on careful human judgment at nearly every step. Thousands of years ago, humanity imagined thinking machines in bronze and in clay and in carved, patient wood. Those imaginings slowly became mathematics. That mathematics slowly became computers. Those computers slowly became learners. And those learners, only very recently, became something that could genuinely converse with us in something remarkably close to our own language. The story is not finished. By every honest account we explored together tonight, it may not be finished for a very long time. But for now, at least for tonight, our part of this story together is nearly complete.